Ooh, hi out there again. Well, I'm lost in front of this colorful background here, so for the time being, I'm going to talk about Lost in Space, which I haven't talked about in some time. I think now's the time, today's the day, because as far as I'm concerned, I've found the worst episode of Lost in Space, hands down, and I want to tell you about it. So like I said, it's been a little while since I made a video about Lost in Space. Since my last one, I think that new Netflix Lost in Space has ended, which was weird and had all kinds of stupid concepts crammed into it. Not even to mention the 90s movie. It seems like every 20 years, some slick exec comes along and is like, wow, Lost in Space is the science fiction property that has a huge fan base, a huge untapped potential if we just make a new version of it. And it's like, no, Lost in Space doesn't really have any potential or following aside from the kitsch, I guess. As a science fiction premise, Lost in Space is a great example of how not to write or put together a science fiction show. I don't think I mentioned this in my original video where I compared Lost in Space to Star Trek, but the premise of Lost in Space doesn't make any sense on a conceptual level, because there's a thing like stellar cartography on Next Gen, or astrometrics on Voyager, where you can pinpoint your exact location in the galaxy, in space, just by looking at the stars around you. You can point at a given star, oh, that's Orion, there's that big red dwarf star, there's the little white dwarf star, there's the big red gas giant. You can look at things, point to them and go, oh yeah, there's that, and there's that in relation to that. And you can create a map. So, like, you can't be lost in space unless, like Irwin Allen assumes, I guess, like space is just this infinite mass of completely identical stars and you have no way of telling one from another, which is like not the case, and especially shouldn't be the case if you're on a fucking spaceship. But then again, the Jupiter 2 is one of the worst designed spacecraft in all of science fiction, considering that for the first 2 seasons of Lost in Space, it's literally just stationary on the exact same planet. Like when that Klingon in The Trouble with Tribbles says that the Enterprise should be hauled away as garbage. Fuck nah. The Jupiter 2 deserves to be hauled away as garbage. So, hopefully I've roasted Lost in Space enough to give you a good idea of just how bad a show it is, like, on a fundamental level. I wouldn't actually directly compare it to Star Trek, even though I already did in a previous video. I'd say it's more like Gilligan's Island, except whereas Gilligan's Island is full of pretty fun characters with great chemistry, Lost in Space has all boring characters except for Dr. Smith and the robot, and the rest of them are just really bland and not much happens the entire time. You'd think that a show set on Earth on a fucking desert island would be more boring than a show set within the infinite potential of the universe, but hey, Irwin Allen is just like that, I guess. Really, that's being unfair to Irwin Allen. Like I mentioned in my Star Trek vs. Lost in Space video, I do really legitimately like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I think that's a great show, and I also like Irwin Allen's various movies. I just think that for whatever reason, his most popular franchise, Lost in Space, is ass. It's a terrible example of how to do science fiction. The premise is similar to Star Trek, but Star Trek does everything on such a better level that I don't think Lost in Space should even be considered like in the running. In fact, I find it amazing that Star Trek Voyager took some inspiration from Lost in Space for its premise about, being lost in space. Like I said, Captain Janeway and her motley crew aren't lost in space, really. They're just really, really far away from Earth, and they have to get back. But like Janeway knows where Earth is. She'd have to be a fucking idiot not to know where Earth is, because, you know, her spaceship has fucking directional navigation and shit. It's a spaceship. And Star Trek Voyager is still extremely popular, at least among a lot of people, especially with the new shows like Prodigy and Starfleet Academy coming out, neither of which I think are very good. But I find it amazing that some people shit on Star Trek Voyager when obvious trash like Lost in Space exists. I'd rather watch the worst episodes of Star Trek Voyager than the best episodes of Lost in Space, because if there's a bad episode of Star Trek Voyager, at least it's going to be really bad in an interesting way, whereas Lost in Space is pretty uniformly crap. There is one episode, like I said at the beginning of this video, that I think exemplifies all of the problems with Lost in Space. And that's episode 11 of the first season, Wish Upon a Star, when the show was still in its black and white era. Admittedly, I do think there are some episodes in the original black and white era which show some promise. The Reluctant Stowaway is a legitimately compelling pilot because it depicts an interesting alternate future, an interesting different 90s, if you will, where the Cold War is still going on. I find it really weird that none of the Lost in Space remakes take advantage of the idea of a 90s where the Cold War is still going on. Like, it could be an alternate history thing. Lost in Space doesn't need to be a future thing. It could be an alternate past thing, where the Jupiter 2 really is sent into space in the 90s and the Cold War is still going on. And Dr. Smith is like a double agent for the Soviets, which I think is a really neat plot beat that is completely dropped after the pilot. Like, he didn't give a fuck about the Soviets. He's just there to scream and be a general nuisance. He's not even putting anyone in danger or anything. He's just a fucking goof ass after that point. So I feel like a remake of Lost in Space, a potential one, would need to absolutely tap into that Cold War type attitude. That'd be a good idea. The other episode of Lost in Space's black and white season that I just have a soft spot for is the one with Warren Oates, where he plays the astronaut cowboy Jimmy Hapgood. I saw that on VHS when I was very young, and I'm gonna have some nostalgia for it because it was my first introduction to Lost in Space. I only had one episode of Lost in Space on VHS, unlike Star Trek, where I had about like 20 or so episodes, so I was able to get a pretty good idea of what Star Trek was about. That was the only episode of Lost in Space I saw. I thought it was pretty decent. I thought that this looks kind of like Twilight Zone. I didn't know how much it devolved in the later seasons with the vegetables and all that shit. But as bad as the vegetables are, as memeable as they are, they're not the worst episode of Lost in Space. The worst episode of Lost in Space is Wish Upon a Star, and it happens just a couple after the one with Warren Oates. So, the premise of Wish Upon a Star. Dr. Smith is, as usual, screwing around and being a general nuisance, and so the Space Family Robinson is like, yo, Dr. Smith, we're going to strand you out in the wilderness. You gotta fuck off, right? They're like, you're such an annoyance to everyone around here that we're just going to kill you, right? We're just going to send you out into the alien desert, which is a fun premise for an episode. You know, you got your protagonist committing murder, which is great. Like with Star Trek, if Captain Kirk was faced with a similar problem, he'd just say, throw them in the brig. Let's not, toss them into the vacuum of space. But Dr. Smith can't farm for shit. He's not self-subsistent. So to put him out in the desert is just like, killing him. They just want him to die, basically, which is a fun little adventure, especially considering Lost in Space is obviously targeted more towards children than Star Trek. So Dr. Smith and Will and the robot go out into the desert. Will just tags along for shits and giggles, I guess. And Dr. Smith finds this machine. and this machine is capable of granting any wish, right? So like they wish for, I forget what, they wish for something, it pops out of the machine, it's ready to go. So this machine is a plot device, right? It's a literal deus ex machina, it's a literal god in the machine, it can do anything. And Dr. Smith is like, wow, this machine is really practical and convenient and would be a great help for space travelers like us who happen to be completely stranded out in the middle of fucking nowhere with no resources of any kind. Like, for instance, from this machine, you could wish for barrels of fuel so he could finally blast the fuck off on the Jupiter 2, you know, he could fill the Jupiter 2 up with fucking fuel and leave. Will is like, oh, I'm a little hesitant about this, something about this machine doesn't feel right. They take it back to the spaceship, and the family's like, ooh, cool, where'd you get this stuff? All this stuff you wished for. And Dr. Smith's like, ooh, it's the wish machine. So this is the premise of the episode. For one, it's not scientific at all. It's literally just magic. Lost in Space is much more science fantasy than science fiction, because it just doesn't make any fucking sense, right? There's just this machine that can make anything, blatantly defy the laws of physics. Dr. Smith makes the obvious conclusion, wow, for a bunch like us who are completely stranded, this is a convenient and useful device that would be really good for just wishing for something to fix our current problem, that we're lost in space. Like, that's the central conflict of the show, supposedly. Although the family Robinson's idea seems to just be to dig around on the planet for as long as possible with no intention of ever getting home or to their destination, Alpha Centauri or whatever. So this is the part of the episode that maybe bothers me the most. Will has an apple that he wished for from the machine, like a really, you know, delicious, bright red apple. And the dad's like, oh, where'd you get that? And, you know, Billy Movie's like, oh, from the wish machine, the magical wish machine. Is the dad's name John or Don? I always get that. John. John Robinson is like, oh, well, this machine is probably evil. It's probably got some devilish scheme in it. It's probably got some malevolent trick. It's probably the devil, right? This is a problem because he has no way of guessing that. He has no way of coming to that conclusion. For all they know, this is just an abandoned piece of alien technology that could be of some legitimate use to them. But he's like, yo, this machine, fuck it. It belongs in the dumpster. Never use that again. And don't use the machine to create a healthy and delicious snack like an apple, okay, Will? So this is obviously a problem with the show, is you know, there's children on this horrific alien planet. And I think it's like irresponsible to bring your children along on your life-threatening space adventure. Like, I know that in Next Gen, there's families aboard the Enterprise D, but that's like the Enterprise. It's like a big fucking hotel in space, as opposed to the Jupiter 2, which is a rinky-dink little tinfoil-ass craft with like no safety measures. And every single week, it seems like the Lost in Space kids are just subjected to an imminent death, right? So Will Robinson, being the optimistic little sot he is, he's wished up a fucking apple. And it says explicitly, like, they're suspicious of how the apple got there because they don't have apple seeds. They don't grow apples. They don't have a hydroponics bay like Voyager does or anything. Presumably they just eat the 2001 A Space Odyssey foam food out of the fucking tray. Will and Penny Robinson and everyone else for that matter are expected to grow on this diet of fucking styrofoam, right? So they're like, we don't have apple seeds. How do you have that apple? That apple, it's probably evil. That apple is probably bad for you or something. Again, they have no reason to arrive at this conclusion. For all they know, this machine could just be a really useful device. They could wish for entire crates of fruit and vegetables that could supplement their fucking space diet, or they just eat rocks and shit. Really irresponsible parenting. Telling your child, oh, you don't get to eat an apple. We're lost in space, and we dragged you up here, so you'll never get to eat an apple for the entirety of your life. For the remainder of your life, you'll never know what it's like to taste an apple. You just got to eat these alien weeds growing all over here. So, one problem with this episode, maybe the most prominent issue in the writing, is that it is fundamentally anti-technology for no good reason. There are some great episodes of the original series that tackle technology. Star Trek does this very efficiently for its time, and it was the 60s. Like, computing was in its early stages, but Star Trek still does a very good job with it. There's obviously the ultimate computer. That's the most obvious example of an anti-technology episode, where Kirk says, hey, if we just let computers pilot our starships from here on out, there's really no point for us to even be here, is there? We're supposed to do this. Humans. We're supposed to explore the fucking universe, not just a computer. There are other episodes, like The Apple, The Return of the Archons, where Kirk literally violates the Prime Directive because he determines that a civilization run by a fucking computer is so stagnant that it's basically dead. So by killing the computer god, he's basically restoring life to a civilization so that it can progress, but it literally can't progress at all if it's under the fucking slavery of a machine tyrant. And then there's subtler examples like the really kind of underrated episode Dagger of the Mind, which is about unethical psychiatric treatments and how they can fuck up the psyche. So the original series has some good examples of anti-technology episodes where technology is called out for just being fucking impractical. The problem with Wish Upon a Star and Lost in Space is that this machine has literally no downsides. There's nothing bad about it. It's just a machine that can provide helpful resources. It's a completely benign form of technology. In fact, it's the most useful possible type of technology. It's basically a replicator, which of course the Enterprise D and Voyager and the Enterprise in original Star Trek, to an extent, it's implied, sort of has. So this is a very convenient thing to have along for if you're on a long-term space voyage. You want to have a nice supply of any food right at your fingertips. So if there's, a family on the Enterprise D, they want a healthy snack, they want a tasty apple, they can just say to the replicator, 1 apple please, and the Majel Barrett computer voice goes, 1 apple, and then it beams into existence, and it's like, yeah, this is a convenient technology to have if you're on a long-term fucking space voyage where you don't have access to things like fucking apples. It's exactly the same with a transporter. That's a useful way to travel. I get why a spaceship would want one of those instead of having to land a shuttlecraft every single time. It's convenient. I get why people would want to beam around. It's fun and easy, except in Barclay's case, I guess. And, it's a good time all around. When Lost in Space treats the Wish Machine like this dangerous technology for no good reason, there's literally no reason why John Robinson would arrive at this conclusion. You're setting up a really interesting premise where you could go somewhere with it, and then you're just leaving that behind and saying, fuck it. Let's not explore this. It's just dangerous. This technology is just the devil. We should just avoid it at all costs, which strikes me as a very fundamentalist, anti-exploratory sort of attitude. I think this is maybe one of the biggest differences between a well-written show like Star Trek and a poorly written show like Lost in Space, is that good science fiction, it has an exploratory drive. It wants to find things out. It wants to discover fundamental truths about the human condition via the medium of science fiction. And Lost in Space doesn't do that. Anyway, the machine ends up malfunctioning when Dr. Smith asks for a servant Again, Dr. Smith is like the only good character on the entire show. He's reasonably entertaining, and it's mainly because he's kind of coded gay. So when he asks for a servant, it's kind of like, oh, I want a manservant, but it ends up being this horrific mutant monster. And when that happens, I admit it's kind of funny. The problem is that then the monster is just completely unreasonable, and it's like, I'm gonna terrorize everyone. It stands outside the Jupiter 2 for like the whole night. John Robinson is like, yeah, Dr. Smith, it's time to give everything you took out of this machine back. It's time to face this and they force him out, to face the monster. And they act like he's made some horrible transgression, just like he's like the most immoral scum of the earth imaginable, just because he wishes a fucking apple into existence for Will. Like that that's a fucking nice thing to do, but they treat him like it's time for you to go out and face the monster, time to die. Again, really cool that all the main characters are just openly in favor of murder. And then they give the stuff back to the monster, and the monster's like, okay. He doesn't say that. He doesn't talk. And he can't be communicated with. That's another thing with Lost in Space aliens. They're way more difficult to communicate with, reach some kind of common ground with, than in Star Trek. Goes away, never to be heard from again. The entire machine just evaporates into nothing, and its monster owner just evaporates into nothing. And then an apple materializes in Will's hand, and he takes a bite, and it's like, yeah, enjoy that apple, Will, because it's the only fucking apple you're ever going to eat for the remainder of your entire life, so, enjoy it while you can. And that's just such a twisted fucking ending to go out on. Like, these people never get to eat a fucking apple, because they're just completely incompetent. They could have brought apple seeds, and they could grow a fucking apple tree on this planet. Like, they're pissing around for years. They're just wasting time on this fucking planet. There's no reason they couldn't have an apple tree, but they just don't. And that's how the episode ends. I'm surprised that John Robinson doesn't knock the apple out of Will's hand and say, oh no, it's a final gift from the devil. You better get rid of that apple, and just toss it onto the floor. But that's Wish Upon a Star. That's the worst episode of Lost in Space, hands down. So another reason that this episode really fails is because of the alien. Much like the Wish Machine itself, the alien monster is not well explained. It's not explained how the monster came into possession of this amazing wish fulfillment technology. It's not explained how the monster takes issue with them using it. Like, they could just talk it out. They could communicate, they could say, we're going to use it for like a little bit of fuel, some provisions, some basic fundamental human necessities like food and water, and then you can just keep using it, because there's no stated limit to the Wish Machine. It can give as much shit out as it wants, but it I guess just doesn't, for the sake of the plot. And the monster comes off as much of a plot device as his machine. It's never explained how either works. It's just like, the machine is great, it looks really appealing, but then it's got a dark secret that if you use it, then this monster will come out. And it's like, okay, but why? What does the monster want? What does the machine do? What's any of this? It's just never explained, and the viewer is expected not to ask so many questions. So that's a great example of really bad writing there. Also, of course, that the space explorers fucking suck. Like, John Robinson doesn't try to talk it out with the monster. Like I said, in Voyager, there's some great examples of episodes where a potentially hostile alien threat is talked out of doing something dangerous because Janeway is an effective communicator. And I watch those episodes and I'm like, yeah, that is really smart of Janeway. She's a good captain. She's able to talk her way out of some pretty intense situations. Like, for instance, in the episode Demon, where they're sinking into the puddle of silver goop, the alien that's pretending to be Kim is like, please, we just need your help. We just need to be cloned, and we need you to give your DNA to us. And Janeway's like, okay, that kind of makes sense. You need more people. Okay, fine. And then the last shot, they're zooming off the planet, and they've left behind a whole population of cloned Voyager crew. You know, that's a good example of communication in effect. At first, Janeway's like, oh shit, there's this horrifying Kim clone, he's got some devious plot, but it turns out he just wants a family. He just wants all his silver goop siblings to rise from the puddle, and that's an okay goal. And so it's explained. The motivation of the potentially threatening hostile alien force is explained. They're able to come to a mutual agreement. Like, that's what Star Trek does at its best, where it says, different species can agree on things. A really good example of that is in the episode Warhead, where the Doctor is taken over by the little bomb, the little missile that's like, I have to kill everyone. I have to go to this planet and blow everyone up. I'm a nuke. I gotta be a nuke. I gotta blow everyone up. I gotta kill everyone. And even though it's a completely artificial life form with one objective in mind, Voyager crew is able to subdue it and say, you don't have to kill everyone. It's okay. You don't have to blow this planet up because the war is over and you don't have to do it. The nuke listens. Voyager is literally such a well-written show that it presents a scenario where a programmed bomb is able to be talked out of killing people. Like, that's next level writing. It's really good. Again, there are so many good episodes of Voyager, so many episodes of Voyager which are much, much better than the average episode of Lost in Space. Wish Upon a Star is a great example of how not to write science fiction, where you just paint all technology as inherently evil, even when it could be legitimately beneficial. It can be a difficult balance to strike. It can be a difficult tightrope to walk between what technology is bad and what technology is good. But as far as this scrappy little band of fucking marauders, I mean, it's amazing that throughout the course of the show, they don't resort to fucking cannibalism. Although, given that they're just willing to send Dr. Smith out into the desert with no supplies or anything and no means of surviving, maybe they were just planning on leaving him out there a couple days and going out and collecting his corpse and bringing it back and chawing on it. Maybe that was kind of their plan all along. I'm surprised they don't do that throughout the course of the show. I'm surprised they don't just, fucking beat Dr. Smith to death, cook him over a campfire real nice and slow, turn him over. He's just the roast for them. I'm surprised that doesn't happen at all. Because seriously, like, they're in such a shit position compared to, the Enterprise, or even Voyager. It's, Voyager isn't the Enterprise. It's not as big, but it's still, like, got, replicators and turbo lift and holodeck and shit. I feel like it would be reasonable to spend, 70, how long's Voyager's return voyage supposed to be, 30, so a couple decades on there. That'd be okay. It's nice and comfy, provided all the systems are operational. The Jupiter, too. Holy fuck, what a cramped pit of squalor. What just an absolute festering sore in terms of science fiction spacecraft. Man, the Jupiter, too, fucking sucks. Dinky ass little flying saucer. Yeah, this episode of Lost in Space, Wish Upon a Star, is the worst episode of Lost in Space. It represents all of Lost in Space's worst tendencies, capsuled into a little package of kitsch and cringe and just everything that's poorly written about Lost in Space. So yeah, that's the worst episode of Lost in Space, and I'm done talking about Lost in Space now. I've been Nick Cicada. Hopefully this was an interesting video. Hopefully you learned something. Yeah, that's it. I still can't tell where I am because this colorful background extends outward in every direction. So I guess I'll just be here forever. Oh wait. Oh shoot. It's just the hallway. Okay, well I guess I won't be here forever then. I guess I can leave. Okay, bye. See ya.